Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump pushes back TikTok sale deadline for another 75 days, saying the purchase deal is progressing. That says China responds to U.S. tariffs with its own blanket tariffs on American goods, while Trump says Beijing played it wrong and panicked with their response. Jason Blair has the latest. With Trump's global reciprocal tariffs kicking off, Secretary of State Marco Rubio sends a message to allies in Brussels. The U.S. intends to reset global trade. Jack Bradley has the update. A deadly storm system continues to devastate the Midwest and Mid-South, bringing tornadoes and heavy rain. Officials warn the most dangerous weather is yet to come. Christina Corona has the weather update. Will a confirmed member of the MS-13 gang be returning to the U.S. from an El Salvador prison? A federal judge today ordered the Trump administration to bring him back. Arlene Richards with the latest. Hundreds of illegal immigrants have been deported to Venezuela in less than 2 days. One of them is facing charges in his home country after teaching people online how to take over unoccupied homes in the U.S. Irian Pazdar has the immigration update. Israeli forces on the move to take over parts of the northern Gaza Strip just after taking over land in the south. Meanwhile, Israel strikes a Hamas commander in Lebanon. Jason Perry reports. And South Korea's impeached president has been removed from office. An election will soon follow to replace him. What we know so far.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. China is responding to new U.S. tariffs by implementing 34% across-the-board tariffs on all U.S. goods. And today, President Trump says the TikTok deal is making progress, and he's extending the deadline for an additional 75 days. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
Beijing has announced a 34% tariff on all U.S. products starting April 10th. This is in response to the sweeping tariffs on China announced by the United States on Wednesday. President Trump added a 34% tariff on China on top of the 20% imposed earlier this year, making for a total of 54%. Before the 34% across-the-board tariffs, China had a variety of different tariff amounts on the U.S. depending on the type of product or industry. Trump responded to the Chinese regime's announcement on Truth Social, saying, quote, China played it wrong. They panicked. The one thing they cannot afford to do. Trump has also announced that the date of the TikTok ban will be extended. He said on social media that he'll be signing an executive order to extend the deadline another 75 days. TikTok originally had until Saturday to sell to a non-China-owned company or face a ban in the United States. On Thursday, Trump said U.S. tariffs could play a role in the TikTok situation.
China will probably say, we'll approve a deal, but will you do something on the tariff? The tariffs give us great power to negotiate.
In response to the Trump administration's Chinese import tariffs, nonprofit civil rights group New Civil Liberties Alliance filed a federal lawsuit in Florida. The group alleges that the president overstepped his authority with the sweeping tariffs, in addition to levies he introduced in February by invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And staying on the topic of tariffs, 4 Republican senators joined Senate Democrats to pass a resolution that would block the Trump administration's across-the-board tariffs on Canada. The chamber voted 51-48 on Wednesday. Republican Senators Rand Paul, Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, and Lisa Murkowski voted to pass the resolution. The resolution does not have the force of law and is not expected to come up for a vote in the House. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. is working to reset global trade with President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. That's the message Rubio is giving NATO allies in Brussels today. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
If you're a company and you make a bunch of your products in China, and all of a sudden shareholders or people that play the stock market realize that it's going to cost a lot more to produce in China, your stock is going to go down.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said today to NATO allies in Brussels that the U.S. must reset the global trade order.
We have to be a country that thinks we're the largest consumer market in the world, and yet the only thing we export is services. And we need to stop that. We need to get back to a time where we're a country that can make things, and to do that we have to reset the global order of trade.
Rubio's comments on trade comes just 2 days after President Trump announced new tariffs on many countries. This includes a 20% tax on imports from the European Union. Rubio saying markets will adjust.
They just need to know what the rules are. Once they know what the rules are, they will adjust to those rules.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that the tariffs do not violate treaties between NATO allies.
We have seen in the past many examples of differences of view, of fights over tariffs. This has happened before without that being in violation of Article 2.
After meeting with NATO allies, Rubio said we'll soon know if Russia's serious about peace talks.
We will know soon enough, in a matter of weeks, not months, whether Russia is serious about peace or not. I hope they are. It would be good for the world if that war ended.
But NATO leaders accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of stalling in ceasefire negotiations.
If Russia were seeking peace, they would lay their arms down, like today.
That Putin continues to obfuscate, continues to drag his feet. He could accept a ceasefire now.
This is while the U.S. is calling on NATO allies to increase their defense spending to at least 5% of their GDP. That's up from the current requirement of 2%, which now 23 of the 32 members are meeting.
In order for NATO to be stronger, it needs partners that are stronger.
Some countries are on board with increasing spending.
That we are going to increase our defense investments from the next year already up to 5%.
While others, not so much.
5% is, of course, much more than the U.S. itself spends, and it's a very high ambition, and we are not ready to commit to a number at this time.
Secretary Rubio reaffirmed U.S. support for the alliance, having positive talks with allies amid some tension over the new tariffs. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is urging world leaders to exclude products made in California from the new tariffs being imposed as a response to President Trump's recent tariff hikes. In a video shared on X, Newsom emphasized the importance of safeguarding the state's economic interests and called for direct negotiations with international partners to prevent harm to California's businesses.
Donald Trump's tariffs do not represent all Americans. And on behalf of 40 million Americans that live in the great state of California, the tentpole of the U.S. economy, 14% of the U.S. GDP, the fifth largest economy in the world, the dominant manufacturing state in America. Our state of mind is around supporting stable trading relationships around the globe. And that's why today I've directed my administration to look at new opportunities to expand trade and to remind our trading partners around the globe that California remains a stable partner.
Newsom is concerned that these retaliatory tariffs will harm California's economy, especially its agricultural sector, which relies heavily on exports. In a news release Friday, he announced he is now directing his team to find ways to protect California's economy. The state will focus on supporting job creation and innovation in industries tied to cross-border trade. Efforts will also aim to stabilize businesses and workers impacted by federal trade issues. California's economy depends on trade with Mexico, Canada, and China, which make up over 40% of its imports. A deadly storm system continues to slam the Midwest and Mid-South, bringing tornadoes and heavy rain. Forecasters warn of catastrophic and potentially historic flash flooding this weekend. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
A deadly storm system has devastated multiple states, spawning tornadoes in Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri, leaving homes destroyed and causing severe flooding. At least 8 people have been reported dead and more than a dozen are injured. Over 116,000 residents remain without power on Friday. In Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee provided an update with emergency officials, police, and the National Guard.
This morning, I took a ride with some of the TDOT help trucks that are out there. They've had 300 help incidents in the last 24 hours to assist people that are stranded on the road or in floodwaters.
Currently, we have teams of search and rescue, high water rescue vehicles, boat teams, rotary hoist assets, all positioned to respond to West Tennessee. We have additional capabilities, sandbagging machines, things of that nature that we can respond and help our neighbors out.
Governor Lee thanked President Trump for swiftly granting the state's emergency declaration request, but officials warn that the harshest weather is yet to come.
We do expect that much of Tennessee will experience or be near severe weather, and flooding is almost guaranteed to happen or be worsen from what we're experiencing right now. So
Memphis has seen nearly 7 inches of rain since Wednesday, with heavy downpours also hitting Jackson, Tennessee, and Hot Springs, Arkansas. Around 25 million people are at risk for severe storms from Texas to Indiana, with 34 million under flood watches from Texas to Ohio. Officials warn the most dangerous period will be from Friday evening to Sunday morning, with an additional 6 to 12 inches of rain expected in already saturated areas. Christina Corona, NTD News.
A district court in Maryland today ordered the Trump administration to return to the U.S. a confirmed MS-13 gang member who was erroneously deported to El Salvador. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more.
A federal judge on Friday directed the Department of Homeland Security to bring back a man they mistakenly deported to an El Salvador prison. The man, Kilmar Obrego Garcia, is a confirmed member of the MS-13 gang and a citizen of El Salvador. An immigration judge in 2019 found that the government presented sufficient evidence to show he was a gang member and dangerous, but held off on removing him due to a threat of persecution in his home country. Obrego Garcia was released from detention and remained in the U.S. until he was deported last month along with more than 200 alleged Venezuelan gang members. The Department of Homeland Security admits to deporting him in error due to a clerical oversight. His family and supporters demanded his return at a Friday press conference.
The government sent him there, knowing it was prohibited from sending him there. They call this an error and are refusing to lift a single finger to bring him back. This cannot stand. We need to bring Kilmar home.
It's just not enough to admit that you made a mistake. You need to fix it.
I am reminded of the innocence of my children, her desperation to make sense of something adults don't even have answers to.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt had said on Tuesday that he would not be returning to the U.S.
The administration maintains the position that this individual who was deported to El Salvador and will not be returning to our country was a member of the brutal and vicious MS-13 gang.
At a hearing on Friday, the government argued that the deportee is now under the jurisdiction of El Salvador and a U.S. judge cannot order his return. But the judge said he should be returned to the U.S. to avoid further irreparable harm. The U.S. is likely to appeal the decision. Meanwhile, a D.C. federal judge is mulling over whether to sanction the Trump administration for allegedly defying his order to turn around the planes that transported the illegal immigrants to El Salvador. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The Trump administration is charging 3 alleged gang members with a brutal murder in Florida. That says over 700 illegal immigrants from Venezuela are being sent back home in less than 2 days. NTD's Arian Pasdar has the story and a warning. This report includes content some viewers may find disturbing.
We're here to announce the arrest of 3 more MS-13 gang members who were in this country illegally.
Attorney General Pam Bondi on Friday announcing charges against 3 alleged gang members. Bondi says the 3 suspects are facing charges for first-degree murder. She gave details about the killing, which took place in Florida.
The victim in this case was brutally murdered, stabbed approximately 100 times by multiple gang members before he was shot in the head.
Bondi says the suspects stabbed the victim so many times because the act was part of achieving a higher level in their gang. The Department of Justice will review the suspects to see if it will seek the death penalty. The incident took place in 2015. Bondi says Friday's arrest serves as a warning to criminals across the country.
We don't care how long ago you committed the crime. We don't care where you go. We will find you.
Bondi added a warning to gang members currently living in the U.S., saying criminals will be found eventually and that it's better to self-deport from the country. This comes as deportation flights to Venezuela continue. On Friday morning, a U.S. flight carrying 208 deported Venezuelans landed. On Thursday, 2 flights touched down in Venezuela, one with over 300 deportees and one with almost 200. A Venezuelan official confirms that at least some of the deportees have criminal records in Venezuela.
According to the study by our immigration authorities, we have detected that some people on this flight have criminal records.
Among the individuals recently sent back to Venezuela is a social media content creator who was deported for inciting hatred and profiting from child labor. He's accused of calling for people to invade unoccupied homes and take advantage of U.S. government funding programs.
Many people who came on his flight were disgusted because his campaign portrayed Venezuelans as criminals to the rest of the world.
The individual is called Leonel Moreno. ICE detained him in 2024. He'll now face charges in Venezuela. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
And South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached today by the Constitutional Court. The move came after Yoon imposed martial law last year that sparked the country's worst political crisis in decades. The Constitutional Court's 8 justices ruled unanimously to uphold Parliament's motion to impeach Yoon. South Korea's acting president Han Duck-soo said today he will do all he can to ensure an orderly and peaceful presidential election. Here's a closer look.
On Friday, the court's acting Chief Justice said Yoon violated his duty as president by taking actions that were beyond the powers given to him under the Constitution. Cheers erupted from thousands of anti-Yoon protesters upon hearing the ruling. There have been months of protests, both in support of Yoon and of his removal, after his martial law decree in December. He has said it was needed to root out, quote, anti-state elements. Yoon lifted the decree 6 hours later after lawmakers defied efforts by security forces to seal off parliament and then voted to reject it. Yoon has said he never intended to fully impose emergency military rule. He argued he was trying to sound the alarm over the main opposition party's abuse of its parliamentary majority. The Constitutional Court rejected most of his argument, saying there were legal avenues to address disagreements. A lawyer for Yoon told reporters on Friday that the court's ruling was legally implausible and, quote, a political decision. On Friday, it remained unclear if the political chaos that has unfolded since December will now be eased by the court ruling. A presidential election is now required to take place within 60 days, according to the country's constitution. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo will continue to serve as acting president until a new leader is inaugurated. In January, Yoon became the first sitting South Korean president to be arrested. The 64-year-old also faces a separate criminal trial on insurrection charges.
Israeli forces are now planning to take over parts of the northern Gaza Strip. This comes the day after they seized territory in the south. Meanwhile, Israel reports striking a Hamas commander in a major city in Lebanon. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
Israeli forces released video Friday of troops operating in the northern Gaza Strip, where they are planning to take control of more territory. Israel has said that they're planning to divide the Gaza Strip and increase military pressure until Hamas releases the hostages. Just the day before, and also in the northern Gaza Strip, Israeli forces struck a building in Gaza City. It was reportedly being used to shelter displaced residents, but Israel said it was being used as a command and control center for Hamas terrorists. Israel also said they took steps before the strike to mitigate harm to civilians. A Palestinian woman expressed her frustration as she sat in the wreckage.
What are we supposed to do? You can say money is replaceable. This is replaceable. But what about our lives, our future?
Israel recently issued evacuation orders for residents in certain parts of Gaza City. And although some Palestinians fear retribution if they criticize Hamas, this woman shared her plan to end the war.
Find us a solution. Hamas gives them the hostages and Hamas leaves Gaza. That's enough. We want to live the rest of this life.
Israel's plan to take control of territory in the north is happening simultaneously in the south, where they reported taking over the city of Rafah and having hundreds of thousands of residents evacuate the city, many of them now living in tents in nearby Khan Yunis.
No one ever expected that Rafah would be separated from the Gaza Strip, that a whole city housing hundreds of thousands of people could be cut off from the Gaza Strip and gone like that.
Meanwhile, officials at the UN continue to discuss the war in the Gaza Strip. A Palestinian permanent observer to the UN criticized Israel's actions in Gaza, saying Israel wanted to create, quote, maximum despair and to displace the residents from the territory. Meanwhile, Dorothy Shea, the acting U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, called on the Palestinian Authority to stop paying cash to families of terrorists who carried out terrorist attacks, saying those payments incentivize violence against Israeli civilians. And in another development in Lebanon, Israeli forces reported striking and killing a Hamas commander in the city of Sidon. The Lebanese health ministry said 3 people were killed by the strike. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up, House Speaker Mike Johnson is leaning on President Trump's support to unite the Republican conference ahead of a tough budget battle. Luis Martinez on Capitol Hill. And President Trump closing a so-called loophole that allows Chinese companies to avoid tariffs on small imports. Will this raise prices, and are there any upsides to it? Kevin Hogan brings us a data deep dive after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Senate continues its vote-a-rama on the Republican budget resolution as House Republicans leadership looks to President Trump to unite lawmakers ahead of the reconciliation bill battle. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
This resolution is the first step toward a final bill to make permanent the tax relief we implemented in 2017 and deliver a transformational investment in our border, national and energy security. And at the prospect of this, Mr. President, Democrats are losing their minds.
Democrats promised to delay a vote on the Republican budget resolution that extends the 2017 tax cuts, increases the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, and calls for an additional tax cuts of $1.5 trillion.
If passed, this will add $37 trillion to the national debt. And I find this very interesting because some of the same senators have had very deep concerns about the debt not too long ago and are now on board with this reckless, irresponsible plan.
Democrats argue that extending the 2017 tax cuts would benefit the rich and impact middle and low-income families, while Republicans argue that extending the 2017 tax cuts would not cost the federal government anything, as it is the current policy baseline.
The truth is that not only did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act cut tax rates for every income group, but it was working families and not the wealthy who received the greatest proportional benefit. Of course, Democrats themselves have previously advocated for the use of a current policy baseline. They basically invented it back in 1977.
On the House side, Speaker Mike Johnson continues to oppose Congresswoman Ana Paulina Luna's discharge petition to allow expecting mothers and new parents to vote via proxy.
I don't concede on something that I believe to be unconstitutional. I can't. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. So we're going to find a path through this. We're working on that. Talk to everybody who voted against the rule, and we'll work out.
It's raised to where if you see something wrong, you say something. And right now I see something wrong, so I'm saying something. And I think that it's important to have family voices in Washington, but it's also equally important to ensure that female representatives are given a platform and that we can still vote. I mean, you can't help childbirth. It's a very natural thing.
On Friday, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson thanked President Trump on social media for supporting him on opposing proxy voting. The House Freedom Caucus has vowed to block all proceedings on the House floor until the discharge petition is defeated. It remains to be seen whether President Trump will use his influence on the Republican conference to resolve the impasse, and whether or not the addition of 2 new Republican lawmakers to the House Republican conference after this week's special elections in Florida will affect the House dynamics. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The U.S. economy added 228,000 jobs in March, far more than expected. Economists polled by Reuters had forecast 135,000 jobs. A Wall Street Journal poll of economists estimated an increase of 140,000. The unemployment rate rose from 4.1% to 4.2% in February. The latest jobs report comes amid President Trump's revamp of global trade policy. Democrats are pushing back on Trump's sweeping tariffs. Earlier this week, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer criticized tariffs as a tax on the American people. More tariffs, that's what President Trump has put into motion. These are on small imports that used to be exempt. NTD's data reporter Kevin Hogan joined Don Ma for a data deep dive earlier. Let's take a look.
So, Kevin, can you explain what it means to end the de minimis rule and how might that affect consumers?
Well, if you're shopping on Shein, it might affect your pocketbook because these prices could be going up. President Trump is ending this de minimis rule with executive order. Picture an import that's less than $800 or so. That's going to be hit with extra tariffs, but it's not all of them. It's the ones that are shipped via the International Postal Service, and that's what you see here. So that amounts to an additional 30% tariff of the value of the product, or it could be $25 per item as of right now, and that could go up to $50 an item on June 1st. So what does that mean? Well, that means that plush dog sofa that you might want to buy on Temu that was 20 bucks, now that could be $45 or even more. So it definitely could affect consumers, and we're going to break down a little bit more about what this actually means. So that's about 9 cents a day that this is going to cost consumers, because that's just the average that Yale gave. That's what they computed this. So that's pretty much like picture a cup of coffee a month. So that's how much this impact of the de minimis rule being no longer an exemption is going to have. So, you look at the bigger timeline on this. Well, you say, all right, so Yale says that this is going to cost, at a minimum, consumers across the United States $10 billion a year. And now the American Action Forum, that's AAF right here, that's about that's a little bit less than 10, it's $8 billion. Okay, but there's an upper bound to that, right? So that could go all the way out to $30 billion, the AAF says. It's just a pretty big impact on consumers. I mean, this could be somewhere around $80 a year for each consumer just in this one move that President Trump did. So that's basically how much you could expect these effects to have on these. Now, this includes all of the effects of the tariffs, though. So, because when you do tariffs, taxpayers may get some tariff rebates, or they may stop buying imported goods so much because they're a little bit more expensive now. But even with all that factored in, it's still $30 to $80 more per person in the United States.
And how do Chinese companies leverage this de minimis rule?
Well, that's the big question, because when you look at these, the de minimis rule is tied to what's been labeled an ongoing genocide in China against the Uyghurs. So there are people, for example, Kim Glass, she's the National Council of Textile Organizations, she says that the de minimis rule has allowed for this forced labor product to enter the United States and is also hurting American jobs in the manufacturing sector. And now, not only that, but the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party says that, for example, Temu does not have any of those programs in place to prevent the company from violating the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. So they say that these products are just showing up your doorstep. Americans may be buying products with forced labor. So this will probably be a way to combat some of that. Now, when you look at the historical timeline, there has been a rapid rise of these de minimis eligible imports coming into the United States. Before 2015, and again, this is in millions here, so I'll just draw that scale for you so you can understand. This is about 1 billion of them coming in recent years. But remember, back in 2015, this was almost unheard of, right? So that just saw a skyrocketing rise. And what happened right around the time that this rise started? Well, Temu and Shein both had this rapid expansion in their companies. So some companies, for example, the Marketplace Pulse says that Temu has become a multi-billion-dollar e-commerce company because it has exploited this loophole, such as the de minimis rule that we've been talking about here. So we're gonna look into this further, and we see that most of the packages that come into the United States are from China, and they're specifically de minimis packages from China. So that's like over 50% of all of them. There's some other de minimis packages that are coming from other countries, and then about 10% of them are not de minimis. So this is a big chunk of the American products that are coming in from overseas that are coming from China through this de minimis rule. So for example, these companies have dodged tens of millions of dollars for example, Temu has, and this is according to CNBC, by using this so-called loophole, and that's another reason why these companies were able to achieve such a rapid rise, outpacing the United States competitors at the same time. And these import duties are now going to be leveraged on those. And so, I mean, you might ask, well, what's the comparison? I mean, you have Gap, right? So we're going to look at the import duties paid in 2022. Gap, that's an American company, right? They make clothes. H&M, they're paying about $700 million in import duties in 1 year. But you say, well, that's an American company. Why would they pay import duties? Well, they may manufacture products overseas and then import them back in the United States. This process happens. Again, that's $700 million. That's a normal company, right? H&M, all right, you got $200 million. David's Bridal, it's a little bit smaller, $20 million. But Temu and Shein, zero. They're not paying any. And they're not even American companies. But they're able to use that loophole and send a lot of those small products into the United States that go below that $800 threshold, which is why they've been able to dodge all this and flood the market with those very cheap prices.
All right, Kevin, thank you very much for that report.
Coming up, U.S. markets crash for a second day in response to President Trump's tariffs. But could the short-term turmoil be worth it for long-term gains for the economy and more? An author joins us to discuss. And are everyday Americans feeling confident about the future of our economy under President Trump? We'll hear from some folks in D.C. when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese regime said today that it will impose reciprocal 34% tariffs on all imports from the United States starting April 10th. That's in retaliation to President Trump's tariffs against Beijing. U.S. stocks plunged again today amid fears of a recession, while Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned that inflation is likely to pick up. But could the short-term economic pain lead to long-term gains? Trump has said his tariffs will target unfair trade and boost U.S. manufacturing. Joining us now to discuss is Spencer Morrison, author of the book Reshore: How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Spencer, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here. Now, Trump saying China is panicking after Beijing's latest moves. Given these are the world's two biggest economies, what do you make of the back and forth tariffs? And do you see this affecting economies globally?
I don't think it's surprising at all that there's a back and forth tariffs. China's economy, just like America's economy, is dependent. What's happened over the last 20 years, ever since China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, is America and China's economies have become linked in a state of mutual dependency. On the one hand, America's economy relies on Chinese manufacturing. For example, most of computer components, silicone chips, those are being imported from China and Taiwan. On the other hand, China's economy is very strongly geared towards exports and exporting products to America. So, the question becomes how does the nations and how does America liberate itself from that economic dependency? President Trump's solution to that is to impose sweeping tariffs on the nation. China's reciprocal tariffs don't make a lot of sense in that context.
Now, some economists are raising fears of a recession, pointing to the markets dropping to their lowest point in 5 years, adding this will be inflationary to U.S. consumers. In your view, though, how will these tariffs impact American consumers?
Well, I think, like you said at the top of the segment, there's likely going to be some short-term pain. However, there'll be long-term gain. And I think the American public needs to understand that, and President Trump has been upfront about that from the very beginning. It's sort of like when you're lifting weights, right? It hurts to lift weights, but after a week, your muscles have recovered and you're stronger than you were to begin with. The same thing is true when it comes to tariffs. There's going to be some short-term economic dislocation. The prices of certain goods could increase. The prices of other goods are going to decrease, though. So we're going to see a mixed bag. But what President Trump is doing is he's setting up the economy not for profits next quarter or even next year. He's setting up the economy to be prosperous and productive over the next 10 years, over the next 50 years, over the next century. The reality is that America's manufacturing base has been hollowed out. And in order for this nation to remain prosperous in the future, The country can't just be consuming goods. We also have to produce them. So that the whole point of this is to turn America from a country of takers into a nation of makers.
I want to expand on that and dig into it. What does that long-term gain look like? Are you optimistic?
I'm very, very optimistic. I mean, it's taken 50 years to get here, right? So it's going to take some time to recuperate the economy. But the reality is that the economic wealth in the long run is tied to production. How much is the economy producing, and how efficiently is it producing those items, right? So over the last 50 years, America's economy has produced, the production has increased, but not in keeping pace with consumption. And this is why that the trade deficit has been increasing every year. So increasingly, America's economy has been becoming reliant on foreign goods for everyday life. For example, America runs a massive trade deficit in automobiles, in steel, in computers. Ships is another thing. America doesn't even produce container ships anymore. If America wants to get its product to different markets, it's going to be on ships that are made in China or South Korea. And that's not a way to have a prosperous nation in the future. I mean, America needs to make the goods that it requires to function as an economy. And that's what President Trump's tariffs are aimed to do.
And Spencer, when President Trump mentions Liberation Day, do you see these worldwide tariffs as part of a long-term strategy with China for a global reset beyond trade?
I think that's correct. So we have to remember that money and power are two sides of the same coin. If you want to have political independence, you also need to have economic independence. The two are absolutely related. And America's founding fathers knew this. For example, the first major piece of legislation in America was actually the Tariff Act of 1789, which was promoted by George Washington on the recommendations of Alexander Hamilton. And the purpose of that statute was, one, to raise funds for the new government, and two, to promote the production of domestic manufacturing. And America grew and thrived off of a high tariff economic system. It was called the American system. The whole point of it was to use tariffs to industrialize this nation. And that's exactly what happened. America turned into the world's factory. At the end of World War II, 50% of all products in the world were made in America. Unfortunately, we've let that lead and that economic vitality slip away over the last 50 years.
Now, one criticism is that the tariffs and protectionist policies could actually stifle innovation here at home, as in American companies will feel less inclined to innovate due to less international competition. How do you view that, or what's your response to that?
Yeah, I think that's totally incorrect. If we look historically, the primary driver of technological innovation and productivity increases is the cost of labor. So what offshoring has done is it's taken productive American factories and it's moved them abroad to countries that are actually a lot less productive. You can look at the statistics. I'm not going to recite them all for you, but American factories are among the most productive in the world. And yet they've been the ones that have been being offshored to less productive economies. That hasn't happened in Europe. I mean, relatively inefficient German factories are still in Germany, right? Deindustrialization and offshoring are, have relatively little to do with productivity, and they have everything to do with incompetent trade policies that were favored by the American government until President Donald Trump changed the paradigm.
Very fascinating indeed. Spencer Morrison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show. God bless.
After imposing a round of global tariffs, President Trump says a boom in American manufacturing is on the horizon, but he notes that there will be some pain for a short period of time. Are everyday folks feeling confident about the future of our economy? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
I understand why it's needed. I'm a businessman and I know there'll be some short-term impacts, but overall, I think it's the right move.
Everything takes time, and I think once it settles out, there are reciprocal tariffs, and then playing field to be even.
The new president ran on the premise that he was going to lower taxes, right? Now he's imposing a tax. It's just called tariffs.
Well, it's going to take a lot more time than I think he realizes because manufacturing companies have to tool up.
Are we convinced that the long-term benefits are going to be there? I don't know, but again, I'd like to think that the economists surrounding President Trump and what they're looking at, and I also think President Trump's always been misunderstood, and so like a lot of Americans, I'm willing to see him out on this.
What do you think about the idea of having an external revenue service?
It's an interesting name. I'm not sure if the tariffs are meant to pay for the tax cuts. I haven't seen those computations, but I do know this. I know the tariffs are an important step to having actual free trade.
I don't like income tax. I think if the tariffs works out, that would replace it.
Americans pay taxes just like other people in other societies. Where it doesn't work is when people don't pay their fair share.
If I can cut down my income tax, great, but I'm also happy to pay for that so we can have buildings like this in D.C. and other things like that.
What do you think about the prospect of having more of our manufacturing goods made here in America?
I think it'd be great and put more people at jobs, maybe bring up some of the lower classes to middle class.
We buy American as often as we can, but you can't, if avocados grow in Mexico, we have to import them if we want to enjoy them.
They don't grow in Minnesota. If people want to enforce American-made goods, they're going to have to pay higher prices, right? Is that a tax? Is that a hidden tax again? Maybe. But at least you're helping the welfare of an American.
And if you look at what other countries are charging American companies to import their products into theirs, we're talking 50, 60, 70, even more. America's played this role for a long time where we've endured that, and I think it's time to level that out.
We have all these ideals about what we want and all the rules we want, but when it comes to paying for it, we don't pay for it. We'd rather have people buy things that come from China with child labor. That's just not right. So if we want to have all the things we believe in, we need to pay for that. And so let's make it here in America.
Coming up in the NHL, Alex Ovechkin plays tonight, needing just 3 goals to make history. And with a very special guest in attendance, Dave Martin reports after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Duke freshman Cooper Flagg was named the AP's Collegiate Player of the Year today, just 24 hours before he and his teammates face Houston in the Final Four. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
Cooper Flagg became just the 4th freshman ever to win Player of the Year in the more than 60-year history of the award. The 18-year-old from Maine leads the Blue Devils in scoring, rebounding, and assists, and was already named the ACC's Player of the Year. The 6'9" forward is the biggest reason Duke is ranked number 1 in the country, with a sparkling 35-3 record, while needing just 2 more wins to be crowned national champions. But those 2 wins won't be easy. The Blue Devils will face fellow top seed Houston tomorrow night in the Final Four, which is being played in the Cougars' home state of Texas, down in San Antonio. Should they prevail, they'll face the winner of the Auburn-Florida game, which pits the other 2 top seeds against each other. But first up is the women's Final Four, which starts tonight as Texas faces defending national champion South Carolina. The Longhorns defeated the Gamecocks earlier this season, but are 5.5-point underdogs tonight. Then in the second game, Big Ten champion UCLA plays national power UConn. This marks the Bruins' first time in the Final Four, while the Huskies are there for the 16th time in the past 17 seasons and 24th overall. The 11-time national champions have hit a bit of a dry spell, though, no titles since 2016. The winners of each face off Sunday for the national title. Elsewhere tonight, Washington's Alex Ovechkin resumes his chase of Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. But this time, Gretzky will be in attendance to possibly witness history and congratulate Ovechkin in person. The gesture is a mirror of what Gordie Howe did when the great one passed his record some 3 decades ago. Ovechkin, after scoring 3 goals already this week, is just a hat trick away from topping Gretzky's career mark of 894 goals. His Capitals host the Chicago Blackhawks, with the game starting at 7 p.m. Eastern tonight. This is Dave Martin, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.